first question is going to be, in your words, you to explain your job. Can you tell us a bit about the work you're doing?
Sure. My role is Director of Design, Technical and Innovation, and that encompasses a variety of subjects. So I lead a few different teams within the business, and there's teams that are responsible for setting the standards of how we transact with our various partners over design, construction, workmanship, and some of the key elements that reinforce quality of our product, the safety of our product, and the longevity of our product. Quite simply, my team look after sustainable development. We set the targets for sustainability that we expect all our partners to meet, and we follow through to make sure that they're meeting them and have an ongoing relationship with them as they do that. We are responsible for the business's employers' requirements. So as a developer and a landlord, we define how we want things built and maintained. My team set the standards for that. We also lead on MEPH and infrastructure. So this is everything related to the building services, electrics, fuel, and large infrastructure provisions for major projects as well. So we have a lead on that. Quality assurance is threaded through all of these topics, making sure that whatever people are doing on our behalf are doing it to the right standard. So we are developing a more enhanced system of how we can ensure quality assurance throughout our projects as well. Building information management and off-site manufacture and digital design are also a key pillar of what my team engage in. And we've developed tools within the business that enable us to create feasibilities a lot quicker, standardize the designs of our homes, and make sure that information is captured and logged and stored appropriately, which is an ever-increasing or a more required standard nowadays, especially with the start of the golden thread for building safety. Coming on to building safety, we lead on the strategies for defining what our consultants should be doing on a business's behalf, and ensuring that contractors are picking this up within their duties as well on site. We have a small team that's dedicated towards strategic procurement, and which is straightforward, maximising the value of our procurement as a business when we're dealing with suppliers in the open market. And it's not much more complicated than that.
That's a lot of tasks. No wonder. So talking about quality, what do you think about the general quality of housing in London and in Ireland?
Okay, I think it varies, is what I think. I think that the standard varies between extremely high levels of quality and sustenance levels of quality. And what I mean by that is minimum standards. Minimum standards are a phrase that we use in our industry, and it enables people to understand what they absolutely have to do as a minimum. Unfortunately, I think sometimes that's interpreted as what I should be doing as a standard. And so I think that causes a bit of a disjoint between what aspirations are and what's actually delivered. I think quality standards are good. I think they could be a lot better. I think there's a lot of open practice out there on European countries that we can adopt quite simply, quite easily, without too much impact on our processes. And I'd like to see us doing that. I'd say that in London and major cities, quality is probably slightly better than what I would see in some of the regions, and that's largely due to more of a focus from the local authorities. You've got the GLA who come in with a heightened set of standards. Major cities also tend to adopt some of the GLA's thought processes and standards to enhance building in their own cities. More urban environment, more people, you have different obligations. You shouldn't, but you do. That's just the way it works. So I think the standard of quality is, I think it's okay, but I think we could go on a journey to improve quality, longevity, future-proofing, and avoid the need for too much retrofit in our products, in our homes as we build them later down the line.
When you talk about this industry-level minimum standard, what does it refer to?
It could refer to anything. It could refer to the energy usage of a home. It could refer to the amount of carbon that your home is emitting. It could refer to level of insulation that you put into a home to maintain the thermal comfort. Yeah. You could have robustness as a factor to consider. Okay, do I put just one sheet of board in, or do I reinforce that with something behind it to make sure it's heavy wearing, or has more longevity in its design? So there are many different ways in which you can look at a minimum standard and interpret it as, okay, that's good enough. But luckily, we're a developer, we're a landlord, and we're also an asset manager. So it forces us to think about what we could do in the future if we just thought a little bit more about what we're doing now in terms of saving money in the future on retrofit and other activities.
Is that something you consider, because you're both a sort of asset manager and landlord and also a developer, do you think your Clarion's quality is higher than private developer who just sells?
I'd say yes, and that feedback actually comes from these developers. So the other thing to note is that in terms of how we procure projects, a lot of the developers out there, the major house builders, major contractors, are either our stakeholders working for us on projects, delivering projects for us, or they're our actual joint venture partners. So in many instances, we will procure land and build a project together. And when we trade our spec against theirs, it's always notable that we ask for a few things that they wouldn't put in as a standard. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there's invariably a small adjustment to the cost to meet that specification. But for us, that comes from a lot of lessons learned over time, mistakes that we've made previously as a business, errors, and seeking out that best practice so we can reduce the cost that we have to invest in a home later on in life. 70% of the cost, if you look at things on an industry basis, 70% of costs are based around retrofit and keeping buildings, existing assets up to standard. So trying to put that money into the capital expenditure is always a good way of reducing that longer term cost.
Do you not do any, so because you said most of your developments are either joint ventures or you developing alone, do you do off-plan? Like, do you buy off-plan housing from developers?
We do. So there are different ways of doing that. You find a lot of developers who will engage in developments for private market sale purposes, to sell to the open market, and also shared ownership. We have a vested interest in increasing the amount of affordable rent within our own portfolio, so affordable housing. And affordable housing also includes Section 106 shared ownership homes that are procured. What we tend to do is go into negotiations with these people at an early stage while they're developing their projects, and buy, as you say, off plan, the affordable rent homes or the shared ownership homes rather. And we will ask them to meet our spec. So in terms of buying the shape of the home off plan, that's one thing. But the specification of that home is what we will give them and say, please meet these standards because we're going to buy it off you.
What are the difficulties when you face or what are the difficulties do you think they face when accommodating your standards?
Yeah. A lack of willingness to change what is their standard, and often the reason is not. There's never an ostensible reason why. Sometimes it's quite evident the reason why they can't change the standard. It could be, well, I've already started this project in build phase, and therefore for me to change would cause significant delay and additional costs which I wouldn't want to bear. So I may take a view and say, well, that's fine. You can continue with yours, I can live with that, but on the next one, these are the standards that we need to meet. So some examples of that would be gas boilers, for instance, versus electrified solutions such as air source heat pumps. We took a decision as a business a couple of years ago not to procure gas boilers in our new homes portfolio, because we know that in about 10 years' time we're going to be replacing these with heat pumps. So it makes very little sense to put the boiler in now. We were met with quite severe resistance from the market, saying that the cost would be astronomical, and what it was is they really just didn't understand how to make them work with their current designs. Okay, it's not rocket science, and I think they have since found out that it's very simple to retrofit. And a lot of people are coming around to the fact that it's now simpler to put these in at the start. So, we have these kind of, clashes of, if you like, opinion over what's difficult and what's easy to put in, or what's easy to specify and build. And often I find that we sometimes lack the technical teams being at that point of the discussion. So you will understand that commercial negotiations happen between people who come from a commercial background. That commercial background may not necessarily have the technical tinge to be able to make that decision confidently. To them, a change is a change and it's going to cause disruption. To a technical person, a change is a change which may actually enhance the product overall and the longevity. So there seems to need to be more tie-up between those technical teams and those commercial teams if we're going to actually get real innovation working, for the betterment of the homes portfolio in the future.
Generally, what would you consider as the main challenge? There has been a lot of highlighting in your answers to sustainability and so future-proofing.
Yeah. Fabric enhancement. Yeah, fabric enhancement is a key thing. From our perspective, you would think about the most expensive thing to retrofit into a building is what you should seek to avoid doing, right? So if I have to go back into a building in 20 years' time because the weather file has changed and I need to blow insulation in, or change the size of a window or anything like that, or change the door frame because somebody's in there and they're disabled, it's expensive. Right? The cheaper things to retrofit are the things that will naturally die off anyway, and you will need to replace over time. Your heating systems, your electric, and things like that. So those are the things that you would price into the actual home retrofit in the future. But as far as insulation goes, and window dimensions and other elements, those things should be set out from the start, and they should be looked at with a long-term view to future-proof that home. And I would say that's the main challenge, because those are things perceived to be the more expensive, when in reality, they're not. So air tightness is a critical one. There is a standard of 5 I forget the unit now, but the government standard is 5, and builders can actually achieve sub 1, which is a real standard of air tightness. But signing up to it, or getting them to sign up to it, is very different, because it's a lack of commitment. They say, I would just like to keep it as per the regulations, I don't want to move to this enhanced standard. So therein comes that dichotomy of defining a minimum standard and people always falling back to that minimum standard. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Going back to what you said around willingness to change, do you think underlying issue is a business problem, or is it a problem of things having been done in a certain way and we want to keep doing it in the same way?
It's definitely a culture. Because the thing about a business is, if you can commercially prove why something is better, okay, there's no reason why you shouldn't be doing it as a business. The only reason why you wouldn't do it is because culturally you're not able to do it, or you don't have the right support or the right partners that will allow you to do it. So I'll definitely say it's culture, and I say that culture is pervasive. It's through our planning system, okay, the approvals system by which we get new homes approved by local authorities. It's also baked into the system of what people are used to. So if there are 6 or 7 different house builders on the market who are likely to be the only person who can deliver my project long term, unless they are outstanding in their actions, I'm stuck with what they can deliver. Yeah. And they will always find a way to convince why this is what we should be doing rather than pushing the envelope, because they see it as risk. So inevitably the challenge becomes not forcing it on them, but getting them not to see it as risk. Yeah? And to do that, you need to, as a client, you need to engage directly with the supply chain first, and get the supply chain to convince you as a client why this is the right answer. And then once you can handle the costs and the risks, you then present that to these partners and let them do what they do naturally, which is standardization and repetition.
Your work in Clarion covers a lot of standards.
Mm-hmm.
So you check up to whether things are up to standard. what is the extent of internal standards that you have? Do you have standards for every single thing?
Yeah. Good question. We have standards for, the key things are, because the regulations are the regulations, yeah? And those set, again, that minimum standard. And then we take a view based on those regulations and say, okay, what's really important to me as a landlord, developer, asset manager? Longevity. So that means that I want things in my design that no one else may have. So I want all my bathrooms to be tanked, because I know the pain of what a flood means. Okay, somebody lets the tap go here, it's a problem for everybody. So I want my bathrooms tanked now. I also know that from research we did during COVID, when people were in their house for a long period of time, acoustics was an issue. Nobody likes to hear what's happening in the flat next door, but they soon realized they could because they're at home every day. So we said, okay, acoustics is the thing for us. Let's increase our standards by 5 decibels between homes to make sure that, Ayo doesn't have to listen to what Seitan's doing, and likewise, and that sort of thing. And then, you go across the standard and you think, is that sufficient for the market? Is that sufficient for residents? Do we need an enhancement? Is there a recognized problem here? Okay. And then you set that as your own minimum standard, which may be above regulation, which is fine. And then you think about things like workmanship. Okay. There are standards of workmanship that have to be met, and there are standards of workmanship that need possible enhancement, I would say. So then we take a view on saying things like, what's a good example of workmanship? Signing off of inspections, on site. It should happen as a matter of course. We struggle with it as an industry because of the time parameters placed on us. So we're developing a system whereby we put more time into that construction period to say we need to stop, witness, test things before they actually go forwards. Because again, we know the pain as an asset manager of something going wrong and having to peel back all those layers before we start again. So you can set design standards, you can set workmanship standards as well. You can also set standards for some of the more, people think some of the more softer things, but these are the things that are critical to our life. Like how many views do I need to give you? How much play space do I need to allow you? How much amenity space should I give you? Yeah, as a resident or an occupant. Because these things are also measurable. You can find out from NHS studies what the negative impact is on people of not having certain amenities at home. Okay, and if that has a direct cost impact, everything is possible to be calculated. If that has an impact on the NHS and that translates into a cost for the taxpayer, we should quite clearly be able to say, if we build homes like this, there is less chance of that happening. Okay, so we're also looking at that as a way of enhancing our offering to residents and occupants. And yeah, I think from a standards perspective, we try to make sure that we are always looking at maintenance, future-proofing, safety in the home, sustainability in the home, and ultimately, fuel poverty. These are some of the key things that we consider.
Do you have standards for design?
Yes.
In terms of layouts?
Yeah. So there is a national design space standard that's published, and we take a look at that and say, okay, we're happy with that. There are also some, not loopholes, but derogations from that standard which are permissible. When we're building our own homes, we don't permit those. We say, we like the full NDSS range, inclusive of the right amount of storage, and we don't accept the 10% reduction, for instance, because we think the home's better built and lived in if it's to this standard. So we have those standards, and we have a product book of units, about 30-something unit types that are repeated through all the projects in our pipeline.
Are those flats?
Flats and houses.
Okay.
Yeah.
Another question, going back to your answer, you said during COVID we realized acoustics was a problem and we changed it. How does that the process of research, identifying problems with the existing standards and proposing new ones, how does that process work?
It works by, first of all, getting enough evidence to prove it's a problem. You do that through surveys, you do that through understanding. And then, what you have to then do is understand what the solution looks like. And there is no changing of the standard without a costing of the solution. That's the critical thing. So you have to be able to demonstrate why the change is necessary, and B, that it's going to be a minimum change to affect what is a greater and better outcome. Yeah. It's a very simple process, but it involves stakeholder consultation. It involves looking at things from all aspects. And it's a good level of control because it stops people just making decisions based on a whim. You know?
Yeah.
So I find that's really...
The evidence, you have a separate team that does
yeah.
research.
Yeah, so we have the SPEAR team, Elena's team, okay, and what they'll do is they'll conduct surveys into different parts of the business. We also undertake post-occupancy testing now as well. So we have a direct route back to asking all residents, you know, how do you feel about your home? What are the best parts you like about it? What don't you like about your home? What's your favourite room? You know, if you could change any room in the home, which one would it be? And that's by asking the right questions, and that's half the skill. You get the data that asks you to, that requires you to maybe look again at some of the decisions you've made. But like I say, the one with acoustics stood out like a sore thumb. It was just, I can hear everything happening in my neighbour's property, and I don't want to hear it. So we have to change that quite quickly. But, you know, so we have, for homes which are sold on the open market, we have the Net Promoter Score, which is a good way of establishing how people feel when they're in the home and whether they would recommend us again. And they have to answer a series of questions, and that results in an output. And there is some qualitative feedback that we take in-house, and we can learn from that. We also have the post-occupancy evaluation, which is from the perspective of the builder and the consultant coming back to ask questions to the resident to say, how do you feel about this place? Did I really explain things to you properly? Do you understand how this heating system works? And so on and so forth. And that's really important feedback as well. So.
At the moment, do you conduct post-occupancy for every completed building?
Yeah. We started that recently. We were only doing it for a few, but now it's in our employees' requirements that for every completed building, you will have a post-occupancy evaluation.
Okay. And how long after do you do that?
1 year.
1 year.
Yeah.
Going back to the question, do you have also a beyond sort of surveying, not surveying, conducting surveys with people? Do you have another team that is looking at research, academic research?
Yeah, so as part of the business we have not just the development arm of Clarion, Latimer, and the Housing Association, which does the property services and the housing management and that sort of estate management. We also have Clarion Futures. And Clarion Futures are concerned predominantly with the people who are living in the homes. Okay. Now they obviously engage in activities such as, you know, teaching people financial skills, literacy skills, giving them apprenticeships and so on and so forth. But they also engage in projects which ask about the estates that people live on, the homes in which they live in, and ask them to come up with ways in which it could be better. And from that has sprung up quite a few very useful projects around things, simple things like lighting, communal lighting, where you undertake some very small studies and people say, if you just put a light here and one here, it transforms the whole estate. It increases safety on the estate and little things like that. So these are very useful interventions for us to be able to really understand what improves the homes and the places that we make.
Do things change at an organizational level, or do things also change at a design by design, sort of development by development basis?
Yeah, it's a good question, because before you change at an organizational level, you have to prove that it's worth going through that pain. So you go through your analysis, you do your due diligence, you find out that there's something that needs to be changed, and then you think, okay, let me try it on a few jobs. So you try it on 2 or 3, and if it's successful, i.e. people say, it's absolutely fine, I could do this standing on my head, then you say, okay, this becomes our standard. And that's how we did gas boilers. We got rid of gas boilers. We found a few people who were willing to take up the challenge, you know, found a couple of air source heat pump companies who were willing to supply them and teach them how it was done. And as soon as we could prove that there was no real issue, we just said, okay, from now on, we only accept these. And funnily enough, once you take that lead as a client, people soon follow you. Yeah? People do soon follow you. And I think, especially with something like sustainability, which is quite emotive but fairly critical, you know, you get people focusing on it.
So it takes a couple of years?
I think you could probably get it done, depending on how your projects fall and at what stage you're at, because as you imagine, you could be halfway through a project, thinking you have to change something, and then say, it might just cost me 10 grand to change it on this project. Let me just change it and see what happens. And you come up with the outcome and people don't even notice. They say, oh, that went well. I didn't notice you changed something. Yeah? And it goes for everything, that philosophy of change, you know. I'm always reminding people that as human beings, we are disastrous when it comes to changing. But if you ask us to adapt to something, we'll do it overnight. We just have that built-in thing, right? I see a challenge and I need to overcome it, so I'm going to overcome it. But if you ask me to think about it and then tell you how I'm going to do it over a longer period of time, it's torture. Yeah? It's interesting, I found.
That answers, I guess, all my questions.
I just had one question about, because you talked about kind of quality at a longer scale, like the longevity of things. How does for how many years does Clarion plan for?
Yeah, good question. So, just to preface that, you build a home and you're meant to think about it for 60 years because the structure is meant to have a 60-year design life, okay? Clarion will start thinking about a home financially, okay, for a 30-year period because you'll model based on a 30-year period and you'll factor in things you have to do to that home within a 30-year period. Then after that, you start thinking about, okay, what does this home do and how long is it going to sit in my portfolio? Probably between 60 and 100 years is the answer to that, all right? So you have to think about, you know, not just the quality that you're buying then, but how much you're going to spend on it later on, because you will have people living in these homes. And interestingly, people are getting more and more aware of what good, bad quality looks like. Yeah, the word is out now on things like damp and condensation and, you know, acoustics and stuff like that. People have an expectation, whereas before I think people were used to a slightly lesser standard or more recognised lower standard of housing. But there is so much good quality coming through now. People are aware that they don't have to, you know, live in substandard conditions anymore. So we factor that into our long-term thinking. Yeah.
But just had a little question that was sort of that pattern book you have.
Yeah.
The book of units.
Yeah.
How flexible they are in terms of usage. So if a designer takes your book, can they change it or do they have to use it as it is?
Yeah, that's a good question. A lot of ego comes into this. Put it this way, we have a rule, okay? And when we made the pattern book or put it together, we socialized it quite heavily. So we talked to many architects and designers, and we looked at what all the house builders did, and we looked at what all the contractors did, and we looked at it and said, this is what everybody does. Let's do what everyone does, but just to the best standard that we can. So the home might look the same, and it might have the same area. Ours will be a tiny bit bigger, you know, maybe 1 square meter bigger. But it has provisions in there that future-proof your home. So, you know, category M42, for instance, in the home is a standard for us. Okay, we were doing that before it was announced as an incoming standard, so that put us ahead in terms of what we could offer residents. Putting in space for, you know, a space for utility cupboard, knowing that we were going to move to electrified solutions, put us ahead again. You know, we took it through the ROSPA sort of safety and design standard as well, and we made stairs the right lengths and had lobbies and landings at the right space to make the home safe. So we thought these are the kind of things that are going to matter. And then we said to everybody, okay, use this, but we will accept the 70-30 rule or the 80-20 rule. I.e., if I give you a site, I would expect that you can use 80% of this product book to populate the units on this site. You will have to have some special units, maybe 20%, maybe 30%, but demonstrate it. Demonstrate it. But what you're not allowed to do is take the home and say, oh, I think this could move a little bit that way. No. Leave it. You can do that on your 20%, but leave the 80% because that's where we get the standardization. And through that, we were able to say, okay, we can select bathroom pod manufacturers who will fit this remit, balcony manufacturers who will fit this remit, utility pod manufacturers who will fit into this home. So you start to move your supply chain into a place of certainty and standardization, which is more helpful for them because they know if they're working on a Clarion job, that's the standard, that's the model. So the philosophy is 70-30 or 80-20, yeah? And unless you have a really, really, good idea, leave it as standard. Interestingly, on two of our larger schemes, 7,500 homes and what's the other one? 4,000 homes. It's enabled us to develop some variants. So you get different architects and they say, that's a good template. What if I just put a balcony or a porch on it? What do you think of that? And I actually think, well, that's good because that works for the vernacular in that area and it works for that local planning authority, but it doesn't interrupt the principles, which is M42, NDSS, fully storage compliant, centralized windows, that sort of, and it keeps it standard.
How often do they get revised?
Yeah, annually.
Annually.
So we make sure we peer review with partners annually and see if there are any new ideas. And it's good because, with the flats, for instance, we started off developing a 7-meter deep unit or a 7.5-meter deep unit, slightly deeper, slightly narrower. And then we went to a slightly shallower one, 7-meter deep as well, slightly wider. And it gives you options when you're planning different solutions for different sites. Some sites need a narrow unit, some need a wider unit. So I think it's good to keep it socializing, good to keep it circulating and get fresh ideas into how to improve it. It's an important part of innovation, I think.
Okay.